Our reading today encourages us to watch and wait for the coming of the Son of Man, but reminds us that we shall never know the time or the place, but still we are to be ready. Even when things get difficult and the whole world seems to be a dark place, be ready. The early church really did think that the second coming was imminent, but 2,000 years later, we're still waiting. So, what's behind this message? Firstly, there is something worth waiting for, so live in hope. When dark times come, still live in hope. We've been through some hard times in this past year. We've been through some dark times. We've often wondered if there's any light at the end of the tunnel. There have been false dawns. But at least we may be approaching a new dawn, a new spring, thanks to the hard work of scientists in creating a vaccine. Watching and waiting for that dawn hasn't been achieved by doing nothing. We have tried to keep safe, to be aware of what we do and how we act, for it not only keeps us safe, but it keeps others safe too. So watching and waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. As Jesus says, the doorkeeper needs to stay awake, ready for the master's return. In the story of the 10 young girls waiting for the wedding party, 5 were ready and prepared with spare oil for their lamps, and 5 were not. We're encouraged by our life and living and by our actions to prepare for the kingdom, for the coming of the King. So be ready, be prepared. I always remember in September 2001, I was preparing for a trip to Amman in Jordan, where I was undertaking work for the British Council in a programme to develop primary education. Earlier that week, on September the 11th, 2 planes were flown into a New York skyscraper that caused devastation. Should I fly out to Jordan on September the 15th? Well, I did. There's chaos at Heathrow Airport as people struggled to get flights back to the USA. But my flight to Amman left on time. When I arrived at the British Council for my first meeting, they said, "We didn't think you'd come." I didn't comment on the fact that my wife didn't think I'd go, but they'd made all the preparations, sent out invites to all those attending meetings. They booked venues. They were prepared for my coming. So I was glad that I hadn't let them down. That incident came into my mind because if they were prepared for my coming, how much more important is it that we prepare for the coming of the King? At the moment, most of us are involved one way or another in preparing for Christmas, writing cards to be posted, thinking about presents for those we love, and hoping that we can gather together over the Christmas period. For children, Christmas is always filled with hope and expectation, writing letters to Santa, and especially on Christmas Eve itself, as they await the coming of the day. Sometimes our hopes and dreams are dashed. I had hoped that we'd be back in church by now and that people would be able to gather for Christmas Day. And Terry would join the children in showing us his latest Christmas present from Jill, as he's done for the past, I don't know how many years. I had an email from Copley School saying how disappointed they were that the children weren't able to come to church for their godly play sessions. But I still have hopes that we will be able to spread the Christmas message. We've got Christmas books for the Year 4 children at Copley, and we've got a number of novel online ways of accessing the Nativity story. In fact, I'm really excited as to what it's going to look like, using QR codes, if you know what that means. So we will prepare ourselves to celebrate the birth of the King of Kings. So as part of our watching and waiting, we may find that we are encouraged to find new ways of being church, to find new ways of sharing the good news, new ways of being light in a dark world. So we look for signs of hope? Do we prepare ourselves to bring hope to others? I think all of us are delighted to hear of the success of the vaccine, and that gives us all hope that an end to the pandemic is in sight. it also gives me hope that empowering scientists to overcome this pandemic will encourage us to put our energy into other humanitarian actions. I also like the idea expressed in the title of Barack Obama's book that he wrote before becoming president, and which he entitled The Audacity of Hope. That phrase came from the pastor of his church in Chicago. It was having the audacity to hope that it might be possible for a person of colour and who was raised in a loving but single-parent family could become President of the United States of America. To dare to hope that he could make a difference. The journey was hard, and there were many difficulties on the way, not least overcoming the prejudice and misinformation that pervades so much of politics today. It also made me think of that story of Moses and the audacity of hope that he could get Pharaoh to let my people go. And then that long journey to freedom towards the promised land, a land he never got to enter, but had to stand on the hillside in what is now Madaba in Jordan and look across the Jordan Valley towards Jericho and Jerusalem. I've stood there and looked down towards Jericho and across towards Jerusalem, and I've often wondered, as I did there when I stood, what would he have been thinking at that momentous moment? As we watch and wait, we also work towards the creation of God's kingdom. We work towards that promised land. That means developing the kind of attitude and character in us and others that can make that possible. Again, I'd like you to listen to a story from Barack Obama's latest book. I think it's very appropriate because it's called A Promised Land. This is the story. A mother hears her son has been part of a group teasing one of his classmates. She sits him down and tells him that there are two kinds of people in this world. One lot don't care what happens to the other people, as long as they get what they want. They put other people down to make themselves feel important. The other group are the opposite. They're able to imagine how others must feel and make sure that they don't do things that hurt people. What kind of person do you want to be? The mother asked her son. That mother was Ann Dunham, mother of Barack Obama. He remembered those words. They must have lived with him all his working life. And he sought to live by them, such that they became part of his remembering in writing that book. What motivates us to do what we do? How do we treat other people? Again, this week I was reading about people going for interview. In one incident, the female in charge of the interviews began by sitting at the reception desk and seeing how people who came for interview treated her. Needless to say, some were very shocked to discover that the receptionist was doing the interviewing. A number had failed already because they'd failed the first interview. On another occasion, one of the candidates was noticed rushing to the door to open it for a struggling caretaker. It certainly counted in his favour in the following interview, but he was totally unaware that anyone had noticed. He'd simply done it as a natural, instinctive response to someone in need. As we noticed in last week's sermon from Tom, in God's kingdom, it matters how we treat people. At this Christmas time, we're also reminded that we're meant to be bringers of light, especially into dark places. How can we, by our actions, brighten up someone's day? Jesus made it clear in one of his parables that lights are meant to shine and not to be hidden away. In government adverts, we're told to be alert, and so we should, not just in these COVID times, but all the time. We don't know how or when the King of Kings might come. And as we were made aware in last week's lesson, he comes in many forms, and the poor and hungry, and the fearful and lonely, and the bullied and rejected, and the abused and neglected, and the youngest of our society and the oldest. Every one of these lives matters. So as we watch and wait, let us look for opportunities to bring hope and for opportunities to shed light. Watch, wait, and work to bring hope and light this Christmas time. And by so doing, Christ will come and live in and through both you and me. Give him the chance to be born again this Advent season. In you, in me. And may our watching, waiting and working help people to recognize the Emmanuel, God with us.